Richard Saren's Strange Planet, following the truth wherever it leads, exposing evil and corruption and the secret machinations of powerful elites, revealing the high strangeness beneath the surface of our supposed reality. Coming to you from the Great White North and his studio beneath the stairs. Here's Richard.
Not a lot of time to chit-chat off the top, aside from welcoming new affiliate KLVT AM 1230 in Lubbock, Texas. Welcome, KLVT. Good to have you aboard. We'll add that to our growing list of affiliates. Coming to Toronto, courtesy of our friends at Conspiracy Culture, of course, Patrick White and his lovely bride, Kadena, is my next guest. David Hatcher Childress will join George Norrie and Richard Dolan for an evening of Q&A and great discussions on everything from Tesla to conspiracies. You know him from Ancient Astronauts, of course. David Hatcher Childress, who's kind of a real-life Indiana Jones to the many fans of his books. He's a captivating speaker, the author of, or co-author of, over 20 books. He's traveled the world several times over, and he's here to tell us about Bolivia and Peru and ancient technology and elongated ancient skulls and what they may have had to do with the Anunnaki and on and on and on. Always a pleasure to have this gentleman on the program. David Hatcher Childress, welcome to The Conspiracy Show. How are you?
Hey, good. It's good to be on your show, Richard.
David, it seems like whenever I'm in contact with you to get you on the show, you're either going to or coming from Peru and Bolivia. What is it about that area that attracts you so?
Well, I love to travel all over the world, and everywhere from remote islands in the Pacific or Indonesia or other places, and of course, South America. I was just recently at Easter Island, too, and that's the logo of our company, the Easter Island Head. There was a flight from Peru to Easter Island for a while. It stopped that now, but I got on one of the last flights and did that. I love going to South America and Peru and Bolivia especially. It's really the land of adventure. With me, we've got a magazine that's an adventure travel archaeology magazine called World Explorer, and a club that goes along with that called the World Explorers Club. We're all about Indiana Jones kind of adventure, lost cities in the jungle, lost pyramids, ancient treasure, sunken cities, Atlantis, all that kind of stuff. And let me tell you, Peru and Bolivia is just the land of adventure for that kind of stuff. I never get tired of going down there, and I do go down there about once a year or so, usually flying to Lima and then going up to Cuzco. From there, going to Lake Titicaca. Lake Titicaca is the highest navigable lake in the world. It's a huge lake and deep. Approximately half of it's in Bolivia, the other half's in Peru, and all around that lake are all kinds of weird stuff, giant, strange, megalithic towers and other ruins like Puma Punku and Tiwanaku. And then there's all this strange phenomenon that happens around the lake, including a lot of UFO sightings, including UFOs coming in and out of the lake. And even there's stories of some weird sunken city there. And I write about all that in my new book, Ancient Technology in Peru and Bolivia. Have you ever been to Peru, Richard?
No, I would love to go. I mean, I've seen so many documentaries over the years on the different civilizations that came out of there, the Incas and so forth, and I have a strange attraction to. Something's pulling me there. I just haven't been able to get on a plane and get there and raise the funds necessary. But you mentioned Cuzco, and I know that one of the things that you talk about in your new book, Ancient Technology in Peru and Bolivia, and who knows, UFOs may enter into this conversation at some point, but you talk about the Inca wall sort of in quotations because this interesting structure that you write about may actually predate the Incas. But first of all, tell us what these Inca walls are, what they look like.
Right. Particularly around Cuzco and the gigantic fortress that's above Cuzco, which is called Sacsayhuaman. Other sites around there like Ollantaytambo and Machu Picchu. You have what are known as cyclopean walls, and those are granite or sometimes limestone or sandstone walls, basalt too sometimes, where these huge blocks weighing 5 tons, 10 tons, 20 tons, 50 tons, and 100 tons are perfectly cut and fitted, often in a jigsaw pattern. They're locked together in these oddball patterns. Each block is unique. The blocks themselves are perfectly fitted. You can't even get a razor blade or a piece of paper, between these blocks. They're just so perfectly fitted together. They're gigantically huge as well. It's amazing sight when you see it, and tourists are blown away. Machu Picchu itself is this secret city on top of a mountain. It too has very fine walls put together in these jigsaw patterns, also huge blocks of granite and stuff. It's in such a spectacular setting that it's really the top tourist destination in South America, and for good reason. But I think the big problem, particularly in Peru and Bolivia, is how old they think these walls are. And just like the history of Canada and the United States is kind of screwed up, where supposedly a few Vikings got to Labrador or something, and then all the American Indians walked across the Bering Straits and populated North and South America, and suddenly Columbus showed up in 1492, and it's kind of like the history, and there's no other seafarers or people crossing the ocean, even though Romans and Egyptians and Chinese and Spanish and the Irish and all these people had actually pretty big boats and were perfectly capable of crossing the Atlantic. None of them ever came here. And you have a similar thing in Peru, where suddenly, this continent is completely isolated. Nobody ever got there. People can't just get into a boat and go somewhere, and that's kind of one of history's conspiracies, in a sense, is that oceans are barriers, not highways. And what we're taught in school today, which is, in my mind, unscientific, is that, people can't just get in a boat and go somewhere. No, they have to walk everywhere to where they're going. Thousands of miles of hostile tribes. So in South America particularly, it's kind of messed up, where you have these giant megalithic ruins, but they're ascribed to the Incas, who were a very late civilization in South America. In fact, they existed only like 200 to 300 years before the Spanish got there. So when you see these giant buildings in around Cuzco, at Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo is particularly impressive in my mind. They're saying, the mainstream archaeologists are saying, these buildings are only 200 years old. And Machu Picchu, too. Or 200 years before the Spanish. Now they're about 500 years old. But it doesn't really make sense. And you see these giant buildings, but that suddenly they were just put up in a very short time, too, allegedly, by the Incas. And the Incas allegedly didn't know the wheel. They had no knowledge of writing. Their technology was primitive. They didn't have iron tools and things like that. Certainly they didn't have power saws, giant cranes to lift 100-ton blocks of granite and things like that. And yet these are all the things that you find there in South America, and it's baffling. And it really doesn't make sense. And trying to make sense of it all is what I do in my lost cities and ancient technology books.
When you look at for example, the stairs leading up that were also precisely carved out of these solid pieces of granite, I guess, when you look at the weathering on the stairs, which obviously took place after the cutting took place. I mean, the weathering alone would tend to show you that these things are probably on the order of 1,000 years rather than, 500 or 600 years.
Well, right, and those stairs, like that you're talking about, in various places, and say at Tiwanaku, where you can really see them, they are heavily weathered, and a lot of people for a long time must have been walking up and down on these stairs. And that's one of the other enigmas, really, too, is that you have sites, mainly in Bolivia, which are similar and in some ways identical to these same supposed Inca ruins in Peru, but they know that they're not built by the Incas and that they are pre-Inca. But just exactly how old they are is the big question. And basically in my book, I'm saying that those ruins at say, Tiwanaku, Puma Punku, they're from around 3000 BC, really. And there's even cuneiform Sumerian writing that's been found there, which is another thing. That's a giant monkey wrench into the history there. In fact, yeah, that just can't be there. And in fact, today it's actually in the Gold Museum in La Paz. It's called the Fuente Magna Bowl, and it has two forms of Sumerian writing on it. One is cuneiform, and the other is Sumerian hieroglyphics. The Sumerians had several writing forms. And it's today in the museum, basically the National Museum in La Paz. But it can't be there. And mainstream archaeologists, particularly in the United States, I mean, they would say, this just can't be there. This bowl can't exist. There can't have been Sumerians in South America 5,000 years ago. That's not history. That's not our history. Yet it's in that museum. And in fact, Bolivia's kind of a renegade nation of a sort, and which I think is a good thing. And they want to do their own thing. They don't bow to pressure that much from the United States. But I can honestly tell you that if that bowl, that Sumerian bowl, had probably been found in Peru, it wouldn't be on display in a museum. I mean, they would cover it up. People are controversial. Yeah, it's too controversial, and it totally flips the mainstream history on its head. I mean, it's a giant, nuclear bomb to all their theories. I mean, there just can't have been that. And what it's really indicating is that ancient Sumerians probably, at some point, came to South America, came to Lake Titicaca and Cuzco, built all this stuff. And, I mean, some of it was maybe already there. There's lots of theories about Atlantis and whatnot in South America, and those are pretty good theories, in effect. Megalithic building, that how far it goes back to, even 10,000 years. But this is the kind of history it creates a big cover-up. All they can do right now is ignore it, which they do. But it really shows you how there are cover-ups in history, and people are constantly asking me about Smithsonian Institution cover-ups, why would, say, universities or Smithsonian or other people cover up certain archaeological finds? And I think that's a good question. But it really does go on, and we can go into this, why they would do it.
Well, let me just jump in here. We'll take a time out. We'll come back. And I do want to pick up on that Sumerian cuneiform found in Bolivia. I mean, for those maybe not familiar, this was a civilization that arose suddenly and unexpectedly in Mesopotamia, which is modern-day Iraq. So, look at the globe. How did they get from Iraq to Bolivia thousands and thousands of years ago? Back with more of my conversation with David Hatcher Childress right here on The Conspiracy Show. Stay with us.
The truth goes through three stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Third, it is accepted as self-evident. You're listening to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
David Hatcher Childress is with us. His new books are Ancient Technology in Peru and Bolivia, which we're discussing now, and time permitting, we'll touch upon his other new one, The Enigma of Cranial Deformation. Okay, so the Sumerians suddenly arrive in Bolivia, of all places, from Mesopotamia or modern-day Iraq. So what would they have been looking for? Why do you think? Do you speculate? Can you speculate on why they would have come to Bolivia?
Yeah, sure. And I do in my book. I pretty much spell it out and decipher what is going on there as best that I could figure out. And in fact, one of the other things that you see around Lake Titicaca and the Cuzco area, which is a little bit north of Lake Titicaca, but not very far, you have these weird towers, and they're megalithic too, with cyclopean construction with granite blocks and things like that. They often have open tops. They're kind of strange in the sense that they often kind of taper in or out. rather than being perfectly straight up and down. At Cuzco, there were also some weird towers like this. They were destroyed by the Spanish. But around Lake Titicaca, and they're more on the west side of the lake, and actually in Peru, but Tiwanaku's along the south side of the lake, and it's in Bolivia. But these weird towers are on top of these strange mesas, and they're flat-topped mesas, similar to like mesas that would be in Arizona or New Mexico or Utah or something. But as you climb up to these mesas, there are these oddball towers, and they're very well made, just like the giant walls and stuff in Cuzco or at Tiwanaku. And they can't figure out what they're doing there. And they're in isolated, weird places. I mean, they're not near some towns and stuff, and it's kind of desolate there, although there are forests, fairly nearby. What mainstream archaeologists have said is that, well, they're burial towers, and the local people there they themselves live in these kind of crummy mud hut houses, but they decided to build these really excellent, finely cut granite towers and put them, on top of these mesas, so that they could, put some dead bodies in there for a while, and then they would probably be like naturally mummified or something. And it does seem that the local people did use these towers to inter the dead from time to time, but it doesn't seem that that's what the original purpose of these towers were. And so that became a mystery, and it was clear that the same people who are building these towers are the people who really built Cuzco, who built Sacsayhuaman, Machu Picchu, all these things, and it's earlier than the Incas. And that's one of the things with megalithic construction in general. Today, oftentimes when we build things, even well-built buildings, they're not made to last for thousands of years. They're made to last for 100 or 200 years, and that's a pretty good building. If you go to Washington, D.C. or Ottawa or something and look at a really nice Capitol building or something, and it may be well constructed and actually made to last for a while. But we have really, with our own construction, almost like a planned obsolescence that's there. And we fully expect to just tear down these buildings at some point and rebuild them. But when you're building with these megalithic structures, like in South America, or it can be in Egypt, all over the world, they're built to last for thousands of years, and they have. They're giant blocks of stone, perfectly fit together. And you have to ask yourself this, too, and I go into all this in the book, why are people even trying to build like that? I mean, supposedly they're simple people without, power tools, without big cranes or engineering skills and machines like we have today. Yet we wouldn't even try and build like that. But they're trying to do something that seems so incredibly difficult. I mean, it's like they're just trying to do things in the most difficult way possible, including building with 100-ton blocks of granite that they not only have to quarry, move 10 or 20 miles, but then they have to stack them up, perfectly fit them together. It all seems so incredibly tedious. But, I'm maintaining in the book that actually it's done with fairly high technology. They actually have power tools and saws, which sounds pretty incredible, but this gets into the whole Vimanas and ancient technology, even that the ancients had electricity.
Well, here's something that I found fascinating, and I know that I think in the museum in Cuzco, they have a portion of those blocks, and there are these holes bored into this solid granite, and when you shine a flashlight through, it's almost as if the hole is been rifled. It's that sort of smooth and precise. We're not talking about, just a crude chisel. How did those holes...
Exactly. No, that's right. That's a good point. Yeah, so you have like these perfectly round holes that are drilled through, say, basalt, which is extremely hard rock. It looks like it's even been melted. I mean, we're looking at power tools. What's also on these blocks, particularly at Tiwanaku and Puma Punku, but also seen at Ollantaytambo and at the Sun Temple in Cuzco, the Coricancha. That's a mysterious building itself, also very expertly, perfectly made. It was a round building. It held this great treasure. There's a weird tunnel system that goes beneath Cuzco and that temple and is well known to Cuzcanians. The Peruvian government actually blocked it off at one point. But they have these keystone cuts. In other words, these cuts that are made into the blocks, and they're a double T. or they're like an hourglass shape. And one side of the T, or the hourglass, there can be circular clamps and things too, is on one giant block. And we're talking, again, 20-ton, 100-ton blocks, which you wouldn't think are going anywhere. But then they're fitted together with these clamps, and then molten metals are poured into the clamps themselves, the key cuts, as they're called. And then the metal clamp becomes, as it hardens in like a double T-shaped or an hourglass shape, and it's on both of the blocks, and it's there to hold these blocks together. Well, that's a really unusual way of fitting giant blocks together, but we find it all over the world. We find it in Egyptian temples. We find it in Turkey. We find it in Greece. We even find it in Borobudur in Indonesia, and at Angkor Wat in Cambodia, also the megalithic cities of the Kham people in Vietnam. You have these exact same kind of keystone cuts, and then these metals. There has to be some bronze or some kind of alloy metal is poured into it. So the whole idea even that different people from all over the world, I mean in Asia and in Africa and in South America, that they're building like this with these kind of special keystone cuts and then the metal clamps poured into it, that these people would independently develop such an unusual form of fitting these giant blocks together, is incredible. But again, that's what the mainstream archaeologists have to say. They're saying, oh yeah, this is just a temple site. Yeah, the people wanted to drag these giant blocks. Well, they made these keystone cuts. And yes, they had to pour this liquid metal in. But that's part of the thing. And now we'll get back to these towers, is that what you've got going here, and this is what mainstream archaeologists don't get, is that, yeah, you have basically somewhere, you've got to have these mines and metallurgical plants. So not just are you going to have gold mines and tin mines and copper mines and whatnot, but you then have to process the ore, you have to wash it, you have to have kilns that are going to fire up the ore. What's going to, then you're going to have the liquid metals come out, whether it's gold, silver, copper, tin. To make bronze and other harder metals, you have to mix them and make alloys. And so, what we're seeing there, what is obviously going on is that somewhere there had to have been some very sophisticated foundry, a metallurgical plant that's got waters washing ores. You would have to have furnaces, and then they have the liquid metals that they're pouring into these giant blocks. And then at Tiwanaku and Puma Punku itself, I mean, there were gigantic buildings there and huge pyramids, and these pyramids even had artificial lakes on top of them. It was, it's an engineer.
That's a lot of effort to go to bury somebody. I don't buy that for a moment.
Well, right. I mean, that's the thing. And they're missing that point, too. They're looking at Tiwanaku and Puma Punku and even these towers and stuff. They just see them as these kind of oddball, ceremonial sites and they're basically saying, yeah, these primitive people wanted a place to meet or something and do their sun ceremonies or sacrifice some llamas and alpacas or something. And so they build all these giant things. But obviously, it's taking amazing engineering and construction abilities to do this. They had to plan this whole thing out. They're in fact diverting entire rivers to go into special canals, and then they're pumping the water up to these artificial lakes so that they can then bring it down and wash ores. So in other words, what these towers are, they're part of the metallurgical plants too. That's what I decided. And they were probably filled with charcoal. They're basically giant kilns. You have to make charcoal first of all, and that can be also done in a kiln and a tower. And then once you have the charcoal, then you can make the foundries and the furnaces that are going to melt the ores. And in fact, what is at the famous Gate of the Sun at Tiwanaku is this sun god, supposedly Viracocha, and he's right there on the main part of this gate, which was this monolithic doorway it's carved out of one giant piece of granite, and they had a bunch of these there. But he's there. He's got a feathered headdress, just like we picture the American Indian chiefs having his big feathered headdress and stuff. But tears are coming down his cheeks, and it's very obvious. And you can see that he is crying. And sometimes they call this the tears of the sun. Well, in the way I've managed to code it in my book, really, is that this is gold. It's liquid metals. Then the tears of the sun is literally drops of gold or drops of liquid copper and other metals, which they would mix together to create bronze and other alloys.
That's fascinating. It's like they have.
As you're staring up at the night sky, ever wonder who's staring back? You're listening to Richard Syrett's Strange Planet.
Ancient technology in Peru and Bolivia. David Hatcher Childress is with us. So this smelting operation, or whatever you want to call it. The other thing I found interesting, when you look at those holes again that were bored with such precision, and you look at those all lined up in these strange configurations, it almost looks like, I don't know, they were running cables or something through there. What do you think those? What were those for?
Well, that's a good point, and there's. Particularly at the Sun Temple, the Coricancha in Cuzco, which is such a strange building, and was totally the center of life in the Inca Empire. And I maintain that building was already there. I mean, these buildings are virtually indestructible. Although the Spanish would try to turn like that, they turned it into a church and a monastery, and then they built walls around it. And then later, it was in 1949, that they had a big earthquake there, and some of the Spanish walls fell down, and they could see more of the earlier pre-Spanish walls, which they call Inca, but are actually probably pre-Inca. But some of those walls are just so bizarre, and they have all these drill holes in them. They're very, very carefully articulated, where you have these different door jambs and things, and you have, these drilled holes and grooves. And in fact, it looks like, particularly this one niche there at the Sun Temple, it looks like some kind of machine or something that fit into this special kind of niche. It has holes for cables and things to go through it. And in fact, I've had electrical engineers that I've been with telling me that, this looks exactly like, a sort of a case for some kind of machine or electrical device that would have had all kinds of cables running into it. And of course, they're all gone. And that's part of the thing with the Tiwanaku and all the stuff that you see, particularly in South America and all over the world, is that the metals are gone. Any piece of metal or cable, even these keystone clamps, the metals that are poured in, they're all basically gone, and it's what people have, often said, and it's a good criterion. And I make the case in my books that ancient civilizations were more advanced, that they had electricity, they had even special sciences where they could, I believe, levitate these giant blocks. They had airships, Vimanas. Much like today. I mean, I don't think that the ancient world had such a consumer society like we have today, with all kinds of different brands to buy and all the different choices we have. But they had electricity. They had power saws. They even had some kind of flight. These Vimanas. My new book that I'm working on now and should be out later this summer, is a book about Vimanas. And in fact, it's just called Vimana. And it's all about these ancient airships and super technology that was in ancient India and the ancient Indian epics like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. And when you read those books, they read like the wildest science fiction. People are flying around in their Vimana airships. They have horrific weapons. They're blasting each other. They're going to other continents and things like that. I mean, it's like some Buck Rogers or Flash Gordon movie or something.
Well, if you have these huge, like, dirigibles, like these huge zeppelins, I mean, yeah, that would certainly solve a lot of the mystery as to how the Sumerians end up, it's one thing just to cross the ocean, but then when you arrive in South America and you've got to get, up to the top, up to Lake Titicaca and so forth, that's another huge obstacle. So if they did, in fact, move around using in zeppelins or dirigibles, problem solved. I want to talk about Sumeria, though, for a moment, because for many of us, Sumeria came into our sort of a consciousness via people like Zecharia Sitchin and translating these Sumerian cuneiforms and their creation legends about meeting up with the Anunnaki. And we're just about to come to a time out here, but when we come back, maybe we can then now sort of move into the Anunnaki, the Sumerians, and I know the subject of one of your other books, and that is your new books, The Enigma of Cranial Deformation, and how all this sort of fits together. Are you good for that?
Yeah.
All right. David Hatcher Childress is with us. Again, his new books, Ancient Technology in Peru and Bolivia, and The Enigma of Cranial Deformation. More of our conversation right here on The Conspiracy Show right after this. My name is Richard Serrett. Stay with us.
It's time to redefine reality. This is Richard Serrett's Strange Planet.
We're back with David Hatcher Childress, Ancient Technology in Peru and Bolivia, and The Enigma of Cranial Deformation. So let's assume you are correct, and that it was the Sumerians who built these structures, these megalithic structures with such precision that has been attributed by sort of mainstream archaeology to the Incas. It was the Sumerians who built those. The connection between the Sumerians and the Anunnaki, for those not familiar with that story, can you just give us a bit of that creation legend very quickly as a setup?
Well, right. We get the term Anunnaki from the Sumerians, and it seems that that's similar to what's in the biblical Old Testament, the Nephilim. And they were supposedly these giants. They have these elongated heads. There are statues that come out of Sumeria that show these guys. They have what they call coffee bean eyes, kind of a weird eyes that are different than what we're normally used to seeing in statues, say like Egyptian statues or something. And they have these elongated weird heads. According to the Sumerian mythology and stuff, they were these gods who brought civilization and different sciences, including metallurgy and medical sciences and all kinds of stuff. Allegedly, they could fly through the air, had airships. They also had boats. And in fact, that's one of the things too. Easter Island would fit into this too, as well. Just trying to wrap your head around what it's like in the ancient world, and particularly them having, in a sense, advanced technologies like even airships and stuff like that. But look at us today. I mean, we've got rockets, we've got satellites, we've got all kinds of different, aircraft of all kinds of different sort. But yet, still, most of our cargo and traffic is done by sea and by boat. We don't airlift everything everywhere, and most cargo really does move up and down rivers and across oceans and on boats, and we still use boats. So even if the Sumerians had airships, which I maintain they did, they would still have boats too. And they would have had huge navies, and that's one of the things. I mean, ancient people had that, just like today. And in fact, it's often was said, right up to historical times today, is that, well, the country with the biggest navy rules the world. And that was, the British, that was one of their songs, how, Britannia ruled the waves. Simply because they had the biggest navy, but wasn't always like that. There was times when Holland had the world's largest navy. There were times when Spain had the world's largest navy. Today it's the United States, supposedly, and although it'll be China soon with the world's largest navy. So you have the boats, and you need landing areas, you need landing spots, you need ports, you need island sort of places like Easter Island where people can stop and get water or something like that. So you're going to have all that. And if the Sumerians were doing all this, and I maintain they did, yeah, they're literally going all over the world. And that's part of the thing today is that what you were saying, how Sumeria is basically the other side of the earth from Bolivia and Lake Titicaca. I mean, they're about as far away as they can get. And yet, it would seem that that was one of their colonies. And what they were looking for, just as the Spanish were, when they got to South America, they wanted treasure, they wanted metals, they wanted mines. And by the way, what fueled the Spanish, empire for several centuries was this giant mountain of silver in Bolivia known as Potosi. And it's literally a mountain of silver. And it became, at the time, in colonial times, it became Bolivia's most important town. It's not today, but it was all because there was just so much mineral and metal wealth that was there. And it's right near, I mean, it's a little bit south of Lake Titicaca. So they were using Lake Titicaca also for ships. By the way, Sumerian is an unusual language. It's supposedly the only language that has no sort of familiar other languages. It's unique. There are no other languages like Sumerian. Most other languages are somehow related to, Indo-European or this language or that language. But Sumerian is unusual that way.
There's so much of the Sumerian culture that, I mean, here's a civilization that just sprang up while everyone else was just climbing out of the trees or living in mud huts. Sumeria had domesticated livestock and developed sophisticated agriculture. They had libraries and so forth, which has led some to surmise that they had, as according to their sort of creation legend, communication with this extraterrestrial race, these Anunnaki. Do you subscribe to that theory?
Well, I certainly open to it, and I mean, there's something to that. But now, if these people have electricity, if they have complicated machines, if they've got airships, they've got beam weapons, they've got plasma cutters. Yeah, they've got high-energy devices that melt things. They've got levitation devices that somehow make some 100-ton block of granite weightless so they can, move it into place. I mean, this is apparently what's going on. I mean, the more you look at it and research it as I have, the more convinced I am that this is what it was in the ancient world. And even, that people are coming from other planets, what that's all about. You have the interesting idea, too, and I knew Zecharia Sitchin and talked to him a number of times, read all his books, and I liked him. I did not agree with everything he said. But what's interesting, too, and this was not what he was interested in, but it's more the direction that my research took me, is that our solar system, apparently, there's a thing that was discovered in the mid-1800s by a German mathematician named Bode, and he had this thing called Bode's Law, and Bode's Law was a mathematical logarithm that goes out from the sun. And what he kind of came up with was that as you move out from the sun, out into the solar system, that according to his law, there should be a planet at certain spots along as you go out. And as you go farther away from the sun, they would actually get, there would be farther space between the planets and all that. And what's interesting is that Bode's law very much fit our solar system, except for one big difference. And that is that between Mars and Jupiter, there should be a planet. That's what Bode's law said. But instead of there being a planet between Mars and Jupiter, there's the asteroid belt.
Right. The remnants of a planet, perhaps.
That's right. So now you have basically the evidence for this story that there was another planet in our solar system, but it blew up. And either the people blew up their own planet, and maybe we're those guys. But yeah, there was a time when then our solar system perhaps had three planets that were inhabitable in the way we would think inhabitable would be, like the Earth and Mars and this other planet.
Sure, and our mutual friend Joseph Farrell, who writes, of course, for Adventures Unlimited, is published by Adventures Unlimited. He's written extensively about that in Cosmic Wars. People can check that book out.
That's right, those Cosmic Wars. And now all these guys do, just so we can get to the enigma of cranial deformation, these people with these elongated craniums, and they look like extraterrestrials, but we know that some people just made, little kids this way by, binding the head and stuff. But people were doing this all over the world, and they were doing this in Sumeria, and certainly the Anunnaki looked like this. But they've found many, many skulls in South America, also in Egypt, also in Kurdistan. Even the Chinook Indians near Seattle and Vancouver, they did this too. So you have these weird cone heads with these strange elongated heads, but they're all over the world too. So, I mean, that's another weird thing. Why are people in all these, separate, far-flung places doing this oddball thing? And the mainstream archaeologists are going to say, oh, they all just invented it themselves, separately, without any contact, just doing this weird thing. And how does that make sense?
Well, I guess they were either emulating the Anunnaki, who they would have sort of worshipped like gods, I suppose, or maybe some of these skulls that you've seen in the museum in Cuzco, they're all on display there, these elongated skulls. I don't know, perhaps they're hybrids or the Anunnaki themselves.
Well, sure. So you have either people who just naturally look like this with these elongated heads, and they're real, although some of the museums are taking these off display, in fact, because they're so unusual. But in Peru, particularly, you can see them. But yeah, so either they're doing that, they look normally this way, or because they were these gods and the elite, that other people wanted to look like them, so they would do this like head binding that would create an elongated head and whatever. Some of these guys too, they would double their cranium capacity, and in theory, their brains would be larger than a normal human's as well.
Just to add sort of more, to further muddy the water, I suppose, there was a book written in the middle of the 19th century. You're probably familiar with it. I can't remember the author. It's called Peruvian Antiquities, and there's a sketch in that book that shows a human fetus with a huge elongated skull, which would, again, is suggesting that some of them may have been born that way.
That's right, yeah. So then that's the interesting thing. In our book with Brian Forster, The Enigma of Cranial Deformation, we have some color photos of a very unusual head, a skull, which has a different fusing of the plates, and it's not a normal, you have different plates in your head, and when you're a baby, they haven't fused yet, but as you become more, as you grow up, they do fuse together. But you have certain plates in your head, but these elongated skulls don't have that same plate pattern that normal humans would have. So they may well be some different species of person, or even possibly extraterrestrials.
Well, listen, David, we could go on for hours and would love to, and perhaps we can pick it up at another point down the road and talk further about these cranial deformations. I appreciate your time tonight, and again, we look forward to 2 new books, Ancient Technology in Peru and Bolivia and The Enigma of Cranial Deformation, and we'll look forward to seeing you here in Toronto, June 29th, and folks can get tickets at conspiracyculture.com. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Richard.
All the best. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
David Hatcher Childress, always full value. Difficult guy to get on the show because, as I say, he's always traveling around the globe. And if you get a chance to see him in person, please do so. Again, coming to Toronto, June the 29th, as part of Conspiracy Culture's presentation, George Norrie, David Hatcher Childress, Richard Dolan. So log on to conspiracyculture.com. And you can order your tickets through there. I might even see you there as well. All right, just a few moments left in the program. A couple of things I want to share with you. First of all, here's a story I posted at richardsarrett.com. This is fascinating. The discovery of preserved mammoth blood could soon make it possible to clone a live specimen. You heard me correctly. Scientists are attempting to bring back the woolly mammoth from extinction, and they now have much to celebrate, it would seem. The remarkably well-preserved remains of an adult mammoth discovered in Siberia have been found to contain actual blood and muscle tissue. Researchers excavating the body came across the blood in ice cavities below the animal where it appears to have been maintained in a liquid state despite the freezing temperatures. Samples of the blood and tissue have now been collected and sent for analysis in a laboratory. Quote, when we broke the ice beneath her stomach, the blood flowed out from there. It was very dark, said expedition leader Semyon Grigoriev. This is the most astonishing case in my entire life. How was it possible for it to remain in liquid form? And the muscle tissue is also red, the color of fresh meat. So there you go. The Jurassic Park dream of cloning long-dead animals from their genetic remains may have taken a giant step closer to reality. Let's hope they don't get the same idea with a velociraptor. That's the last thing we need, one of those things loose on the streets of Toronto or New York or what have you. Say hello on Twitter at Richard Serrett or email me through the website www.richardserrett, that's SYRETT.com. Back next week with Stephen Bassett, Victor Vigiani, and the mystery man who was sort of helping to fund, in part, the citizens' hearing on disclosure. In the meantime, don't be afraid. There's nothing concealed that won't be revealed and nothing hidden that won't be made known. What you hear in the dark, speak in the light. What I say in a whisper, proclaim from the housetops. Move over, Aphrodite. I'm coming home. Good night.
A new Richard Serrett's Strange Planet drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Subscribe at StrangePlanetPodcast.com.